Hello, class. So this is the class on environmental analysis. This is part 1 of week 4, and you're only required to watch this if you missed the class. So that would have been our 7th class. We're going to talk about general, industry, and competitor environments. So firms can't directly control the general environment segments. And accordingly, what a company seeks to do is recognize trends in each segment of the general environment and then predict each trend's effect on it. We divide these 3 into the general, the industry, and the competitive environments. In the general environment, there are 7 segments. We have the demographic, economic, political/legal, sociocultural, technological, global, and sustainable physical. The industry environment is the set of factors that directly influences a firm and its competitive actions and responses. In total, the interactions among these 5 factors determine an industry's profitability potential. And these are the 5 factors or the 5 forces of competition. In turn, the industry's profitability potential influences the choices each firm makes about its competitive actions and responses. The challenge for a firm is to locate a position within an industry where it can favorably influence the 5 factors or where it can successfully defend itself against their influence. So the greater a firm's capacity to favorably influence its industry environment, the greater the likelihood it will earn above average returns. An analysis of the general environment focuses on environmental trends and their implications. An analysis of the industry environment focuses on the factors and conditions influencing an industry's profitability potential. And an analysis of competitors is focused on predicting competitors' actions, responses, and intentions. In combination, these results influence the firm's vision, mission, choice of strategies, and the competitive actions and responses it will take to implement those strategies. Although we discuss each analysis separately, the firm can develop and implement a more effective strategy when it effectively integrates the insights provided by analyses of the general, industry, and competitor environments. Most firms face external environments that are turbulent, complex, and global, conditions that make interpreting these environments difficult. To cope with often ambiguous and incomplete environmental data, and to increase understanding of the general environment, firms complete an external environmental analysis. This analysis has 4 parts. It's scanning, monitoring, forecasting, and assessing. Identifying early signals of environmental changes and trends is included under scanning. An opportunity is a condition in the general environment that, if exploited effectively, helps a company reach strategic competitiveness. A threat is a condition in the general environment that may hinder a company's efforts to achieve strategic competitiveness. Through scanning, firms identify early signals of potential changes in the general environment and detect changes that are already underway. Scanning activities must be aligned with the organizational context. A scanning system designed for a volatile environment is inappropriate for a firm that's in a stable environment. So scanning often reveals ambiguous, incomplete, or unconnected data and information that require careful analysis. The next stage is monitoring. And when monitoring, analysts observe environmental changes to see if an important trend is emerging from among those spotted through scanning. Critical to success, monitoring is the firm's ability to detect meaning in environmental events and trends. For example, a recent report from Predictive Index found that 48% of employees have thought about changing careers within the past 12 months. 79% of people feel comfortable working in person post-COVID. And 63% of those with a bad manager are thinking of leaving their company within the next 12 months. Scanning and monitoring are concerned with events and trends in the general environment at a point in time. When forecasting, analysts develop feasible projections of what might happen and how quickly as a result of the events and trends detected through scanning and monitoring. So forecasting events and outcomes accurately can be very, very challenging. When assessing, the objective is to determine the timing and significance of the effects of environmental changes and trends that have been identified. Through scanning, monitoring, and forecasting, analysts are able to understand the general environment. Additionally, the intent of assessment is to specify the implications of that understanding. Without assessment, the firm has data that may be interesting, but of unknown competitive relevance. Even if formal assessment is inadequate, the appropriate interpretation of that information is important. Accurately assessing the trends expected to take place in the segments of a firm's general environment can be very important, but accurately interpreting the meaning of those trends is even more important. However, to accurately conduct external analysis, you must understand the segments of the general environment. So let's talk about each of the 7 segments a little bit. The demographic segment is concerned with a population size, age structure, geographic distribution, ethnic mix, and income distribution. Demographic segments are commonly analyzed on a global basis because of their potential effects across countries' borders and because many firms compete in global markets. The economic environment refers to the nature and direction of the economy in which a firm competes or may compete. In general, firms seek to compete in relatively stable economies with strong growth potential. Because nations are interconnected as a result of the global economy, firms must scan, monitor, forecast, and assess the health of their host nation, as well as the health of the economies inside of it. It can be challenging for firms to study the economic environment to predict economic trends that may occur and their effects on them. And there's at least 2 reasons for this. First, the global recession of 2008 and 2009 created numerous problems for companies throughout the world, including problems of reduced consumer demand, increases in firms' inventory levels, development of additional governmental regulations, and a tightening of access to financial resources. Second, the global recovery from the economic shock in 2008 and 2009 continues to be persistently slow and relatively weak compared to previous recoveries. And third, the pandemic and the shutdown of entire national economies has wreaked havoc on many businesses around the world. Firms have to adjust not only to the economic shock and try to recover from it, they have to respond to what appears to be an unpredictable recovery. The political legal segment is an arena in which organizations and interest groups compete for attention, resources, and a voice in overseeing the body of laws and regulations guiding interactions among nations, as well as between firms and various local governmental agencies. Essentially, the segment is concerned with how organizations try to influence governments and how they try to understand the influences, both current and projected, of those governments on their competitive actions and responses. Commonly, firms develop a political strategy to specify how they will study the political legal segment, as well as approaches they might take, such as lobbying efforts, in order to successfully deal with opportunities and threats that surface within this segment at different points in time. The sociocultural segment is concerned with a society's attitudes and cultural values. Because attitudes and values form the cornerstone of a society, they often drive demographic, economic, political, legal, and technological conditions and changes. Individual societies' attitudes and cultural orientations are anything but stable, meaning that firms must carefully scan, monitor, forecast, and assess them to recognize and study associated opportunities and threats. Successful firms must also have an awareness of changes that are taking place in the societies and their associated cultures in which they are competing. Indeed, societal and culture changes challenge firms to find a way to adapt to stay ahead of their competition and their competitors and stay relevant in the minds of their customers. Research has shown that sociocultural factors influence the entry into new markets and the development of new firms in a country. Pervasive and diversified in scope, technological changes affect many parts of societies. These effects occur primarily through new products, processes, and materials. The technological segment includes the institutions and activities involved in creating new knowledge and translating that knowledge into new outputs, products, processes, and materials. Given the rapid pace of technological changes and risk of disruption, it's vital for firms to thoroughly study the technological segment. The importance of these efforts is suggested by the finding that early adopters of new technology often achieve higher market shares and earn higher returns. So both large and small firms should continuously scan the general environment to identify potential substitutes for technologies that are in current use, as well as to identify newly emerging technologies from which their firm could derive competitive advantage. The global segment includes relevant new global markets, existing markets that are changing, important international political events, and critical cultural and institutional characteristics of global markets. For example, firms competing in the automobile industry must study the global segment. The fact that consumers in multiple nations are willing to buy cars and trucks from whatever area of the world supports this position. When studying the global segment, firms should recognize that globalization of business markets may create opportunities to enter new markets, as well as threats that new competitors from other economies may also enter their market. The sustainable physical environment segment refers to potential and actual changes in the physical environment and business practices that are intended to positively respond to those changes with the intent of creating a sustainable environment. Concerned with trends oriented to sustaining the world's physical environment, firms recognize that ecological, social, and economic systems interactively influence what happens in this particular segment, and they're part of an interconnected global society. Companies across the globe are concerned about the physical environment, and many record the actions that are taken in reports with names such as sustainability and corporate social responsibility. Moreover, and in a comprehensive sense, an increasing number of companies are interested in sustainable development, which is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. There are many parts or attributes of the physical environment that firms consider as they try to identify trends in the physical environment segment. Because of the importance to firms of becoming sustainable, certification programs have been developed to help them understand how to be sustainable organizations. And as the world's largest retailer, Walmart's environmental footprint is huge, meaning that trends in the physical environment can significantly affect this firm and how it chooses to operate. Perhaps in light of trends occurring in the physical environment, Walmart has announced that its goal is to produce zero waste and to use 100% renewable energy to power its operations. So that concludes the presentation. To wrap it all up, I've provided this video on the general environment that covers many of what we've just talked about, but may give you some added insight into understanding the general environment.
If there's any certainty in business today, it's the presence of uncertainty. So much of what happens in today's organizations is influenced by things outside of their control. Whether it be lackluster consumer spending caused by an economic recession, or even a tsunami that damages supplier networks, businesses must be ready to deal with changes in their external environments. A business's external environment is often described as the forces that exist outside of the company that have the potential to affect it in some way. Although it's impossible to control what happens in their external environments, businesses attempt to predict changes so they can adapt accordingly. In order to conduct more detailed analysis, the external environment is commonly split into two categories: the general environment and the specific environment. In this video, we're going to spend our time looking into the general environment. The general environment consists of the economic, technological, sociocultural, and political and legal trends that influence a business. By looking into each of these areas, business managers are able to identify possible opportunities and threats that can influence the performance of the business. The first element of the general environment is the economy. In this area, our focus is on evaluating the state of the economy in the countries where the business operates. In a general sense, businesses prefer a strong economy over a weak economy. In a strong economy, unemployment is often low, which means people not only have money to pay for necessities like living expenses, but also have discretionary income to devote to things like vacations, cars, and dining out. But look at what happens when an economy is struggling, much like the US economy has performed over the past several years. An economy suffering from high unemployment translates to mediocre consumer spending as people skimp on luxuries and instead focus on the essentials. The end result is less demand for goods and services, which has a significant effect on business revenues. Although there are certainly some exceptions to this, a growing economy is generally good for business. So evaluating the economic environment is an important activity of managers as they attempt to forecast sales, develop production schedules, and staff their businesses. In a practical sense, managers often look at the Consumer Confidence Index, Business Confidence Index, unemployment rate, new and existing home sales, durable goods orders, and the Producer Price Index to make an assessment as to the health of an economy. Although relying on one indicator alone can lead to errors in decision-making, evaluating several indicators can provide an accurate representation of an economy. The second element of the general environment are technological trends. Technology, in this case, is usually described as the knowledge, tools, and techniques that are used to transform inputs into outputs. Inputs commonly take the form of raw materials like steel, copper, or iron ore, while information includes facts, figures, and statistics. These inputs are used to produce outputs, which take the form of goods and services. For example, computer software and hardware, which represent technology, allow me the opportunity to take information and present it in the form of a video. Technology, as we know it, changes at a blistering pace. And although these changes are commonly good for consumers in terms of added convenience, they represent trends that business managers must be aware of. Just look at digital books, which represent a relatively new market. Companies that identified this trend early on and adapted to it have performed rather well, like Amazon, for example. However, others who downplayed the significance of digital books failed to adapt in time to actually leverage the trend. 3D printers also represent a new technological trend that is drastically altering the way that businesses operate. With the ability to print on demand, many businesses can now avoid the accumulation of inventory and thus put those resources to use in other areas. And last, but certainly not least, we have the increased use of mobile devices. As people are consuming more and more content on mobile devices and less on traditional desktop and laptop computers, business managers are scrambling to adapt websites, update software, and even develop mobile advertising platforms to leverage the shift. Facebook, who went through an IPO last year, went through a rather lengthy process of increasing its mobile advertising efforts as it realized that a majority of its users access the service on mobile devices, but a majority of its advertising revenues were actually derived from traditional desktop and laptop users. The third element of the general environment are sociocultural trends. Often referred to as the sociocultural environment, this area includes the demographic characteristics, behavior, attitudes, and beliefs of people in a society. So from a business perspective, we're attempting to identify changes or trends in these areas that can serve as possible opportunities. We can also evaluate this area to identify changes that pose as risks, in which case we should attempt to lessen the significance of that pending risk. Sociocultural trends include the shifting age of Americans, the rising Hispanic population, and increases in dual-income households. Due to a combination of medical advances, which allow people to live longer, and also the aging of the baby boomer generation, the population of the United States is starting to look a little older. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 20% of the U.S. population was 55 and older in 2000. In 2010, the percentage rose to 25% and is expected to continue to rise. This change has produced, among many other things, an increase in pharmaceutical retailers, as well as assisted living centers, as businesses attempt to position themselves to take advantage of the shift. A rising Hispanic population has also presented opportunities for businesses that are now tailoring their goods, services, and advertising messages to them as a result of their increased purchasing power. Even politicians are adapting their campaign strategies with consideration for the rising Hispanic population in the U.S. And last, we have increases in dual-income households. In the past 30 years alone, the percentage of families where both spouses worked has risen to 61% in 2012 from 47% in 1982. These numbers vary even greater if you start back in the 1950s. This transition away from the traditional household, as it's often coined, isn't a bad thing. Rather, it presents opportunities for businesses as our attitudes towards the makeup of new households shift. A few things that have been produced in response to this transition include an increased number of daycare centers to accommodate working parents, an increased number of convenience services such as delivering groceries directly to homes, and even employers offering flexible work arrangements and other benefits to attract working parents. The fourth and final element of the general environment are political and legal trends. Commonly referred to as the political and legal environment, this area includes legislation, regulations, and even court decisions that govern and regulate business behavior. Although business managers can't necessarily change laws, though they certainly try, they do need to operate within the laws and other regulations established by the country that they operate within. Some of the changes that are affecting businesses today include the Affordable Care Act, which includes a penalty to employers who don't offer health insurance to employees who work more than 29 hours, assuming the employer has above 49 full-time equivalent workers. A possible increase in the national minimum wage rate also presents a change that business managers must consider and can be very significant to those employers who hire primarily low-wage workers. These four areas, the economy, as well as technological, sociocultural, and political and legal trends, make up the general environment. And although business managers can't influence these changes or trends, they can anticipate them. Doing so will allow a business's managers to identify opportunities in the area of new markets and products, while also protecting their businesses against changes looming on the horizon. In our next video, we'll discuss the second component to external environments, the specific environment. For questions, please leave them in the comment box below, and remember to subscribe.
Right, so that concludes part 1 of week 4. If you missed the second class of week 4, then you'll need to watch the next video. Until then, see you in class and have a great day.